Okay, let's do this thing. This is Climate Talk Radio, where there ain't no denying it. We're too busy solving it. Climate change has indeed arrived to a neighborhood near you. So now what? I'm your host, Nancy Skinner, a longtime climate veteran and talk radio host, as it turns out. So we're launching Climate Talk Radio. We're broadcasting live from our flagship station, 1480 AM in Washington, D.C. That's right, the nation's capital, daily from 4 to 6 p.m. So all you climate Congress deniermen should be listening. And if you're a cabbie, make sure you have on 1480 AM for the climate Congress deniermen and their denier staff. Our number is 1-800-MY-CLIMATE. That's right, not there. It's ours, all of ours. You can also listen online at climatetalkradio.com or on your Climate Talk Radio phone or tablet app. Yes, take me everywhere. You can follow me, Nancy Skinner, on Twitter at Climate Talker and on Facebook, Climate Talk Radio. So we're like everywhere. My cell phone and social security number coming up next hour. Now, let's get started with Climate Talk Radio. Producer Pete is with us. Hi, Pete. How are you?
Good. How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing very well, thank you, today. Actually having a very good day. I know you're not. So we'll make it better. Talking about climate change. A lot to dig into. Let's go ahead and do that. So joining us now is our very own climate media editor, Peter Sinclair, who runs the fabulous website climatecrocs.com, where he's been debunking the hoaxers for eons. And he's also the international media director of the Dark Snow Project, where he's been to Greenland and the ice sheets two times now, working on that exciting project. Hi, Peter.
Hey, Nancy. What's going on?
Always a lot going on, right? And at some point, I really want to hear more about the Dark Snow Project you're working on and all about Greenland, really drill down into that, pardon the pun. But we are 11 days out from the elections. So I think we really have to start off with talking about the politics here. Don't you agree? It's high political.
It's kind of fascinating. It's kind of fascinating what's going on with politicians who would like to be silent or in denial about climate are being forced to speak up about it, and in some cases really kind of backpedal on their positions.
Yeah, this is one of the first elections where I've ever actually seen the question being asked or really talked about. So it's kind of exciting and entertaining, their answers. Let's start with the gubernatorial debate in Florida, where Governor Rick Scott, Republicans being challenged by former Republican. Now, he's now a Democrat, right? He did a full switch there, Charlie Crist. And so they had a debate, and the question came up, believe it or not. A real question was asked about climate change at the debate. Let's hear their responses and listen carefully.
Governor Scott, I want to move on to one other subject that scientists in the state are very concerned about. People who live near the beach are very concerned about. That's climate change. Whenever you're asked about whether or not climate change is caused by man in part or in whole, you say you're not a scientist. But you are a governor. Doctors advise you on Ebola. Economists advise you on the economy. Why are you so reluctant to believe the overwhelming majority of scientists who say that man contributes to climate change?
Sure. So what I'm in is the solutions. So here's what we've done. I can tell you what we've done. We've spent $350 million to deal with sea level rise down in the Keys. We spent, or down in the Miami area. We've spent $100 million to deal with coral reefs. We did historic settlement with the federal government over the Everglades. We put historic money into our springs. So we're going piece by piece and solving problems. That's the right way to do this. Charlie's going to talk about, he'll have climate change, global warming conferences, and then do nothing. He didn't put money to deal with sea level rise. He didn't lift a finger to settle the lawsuit over the Everglades. He didn't put a dime into coral reefs. He didn't put money to make sure our springs were protected. But he'll have a nice conference. He'll talk a big game. But under Charlie, nothing will happen.
Governor Crist?
Well, I believe in climate change. I believe in global warming, and I think that man is a significant part in that. We did have conferences, but I signed executive orders, Rick, the nature of which you would never sign, to cut emissions. Now, why do I believe it's important to do that? Because I believe in renewable energy. I believe in clean energy, like solar, wind. These are the kind of things that I think are important instead of continuing to be addicted to gasoline at the pump. Now, that's who helps fund your campaign, I guess, but those aren't the people that I'm looking out for. I'm looking out for the people at home. We ought to have more electric cars. We ought to have more solar energy and lower costs.
I'm afraid we have to take a break. When we come back.
Man, we don't want to get into the renewable energy stuff. The answer is no, we want to stick to the problem. Peter, you posted about this debate on climatecrocs.com. Is this progress in listening to what I'm suggesting here? Because John Boehner, not too long ago was asked on George Stephanopoulos about climate change, and he said the idea that carbon dioxide is a carcinogen that is harmful to our environment is almost comical. Every time we exhale carbon dioxide. Every cow in the world, when they do what they do, you've got more carbon dioxide, which is completely idiotic. So is it progress when now these guys are saying they're not scientists, so they can't answer the question?
Well, funny story that John Boehner should say carbon dioxide is not a carcinogen. Of course, 20 years ago, he was handing out checks from the tobacco industry on the floor of Congress, so apparently he believed that tobacco was not a carcinogen either. But of course, that's not why we're worried about CO2. We're worried because it warms the atmosphere. And what's interesting now is that the science has become so compelling, and moreover, the planet itself is speaking so loudly across the country. According to every poll, get it, that climate's a problem, that we're doing it, and that we need to stop. And so it really is quite a bind for many politicians, particularly Republican ones, because they have a base that is rabidly anti-science. You may have seen the clip of a Republican member of the Science Committee, no less, saying that major aspects of modern science were lies from the pit of hell. So they have to deal with that contingent. But interestingly, we're seeing all over the country races where climate is front and center. Right here where I live in Michigan, it's front and center. Colorado is another place. It's front and center. Ads are going back and forth and forcing candidates to have a position and to respond.
Yeah, but those let's just face it, those on the side that don't want to accept it, Frank Luntz, the, famous pollster, must have updated his playbook on this, because those who have not wanted to accept it and have been saying the science was bad or wrong or whatever, now you're right, it's changed. People can see it and feel it with their own eyes. So now the line is, I'm not a scientist. That's like, the get out of jail free card for all these guys. I'm not a scientist. And that's what he said. And if you listen to that clip, it's interesting because what he did say is he said, I want to get to solutions. Rick Scott said this. I've funded money to deal with sea level rise and with the Everglades and things. Those little piecemeal solutions he's talking about, one, that's not dealing with the overall issue of global climate change. And Charlie Crist said, we got to cut emissions. This is just dealing with the impact. But two, what about this idea that if you're not a scientist, I say, look, if you don't believe in science, then you should never go to a doctor, never take a pharmaceutical drug, don't even get behind the wheel of a car, right? Because it's all science.
And don't get on an airplane, for God's sakes.
Oh, for certain, yeah. This whole sheer thing? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I cringe when I hear people say, I believe in climate change, because it's sort of like, do I believe in gravity? Well, no, it's just the way the universe is, the physics of our atmosphere, has been, fairly well understood, certainly for the last 60 years or so. Yeah. And so it's kind of ridiculous to say, I believe in it like it's some kind of a religious choice, No, it's just physics, like apples fall from trees, greenhouse gases make the climate warmer. This is physics.
So they have that line now, because I always blame the reporters in the media now. This is one of the reasons I started Climate Talk Radio, because shame on them for not following through with questions, because I would say, look, you're not an economist, so how do you have any right to talk about what we should be doing with our budget, whether we should be trying to pursue Keynesian economics or tax cuts? Because you're not an economist, you're a lawyer. So why are you talking about the economy? Because you don't have that skill set. You're not an accountant, so what do? You have the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and the fiscal agencies, and guess what? Those guys are accountants, professional accountants, and they crunch the numbers, and you take those numbers and you enact a budget every year based on the expertise of the people that you've hired. But when it comes to climate scientists like ours at NASA and NOAA and U.S. National Academy of Sciences, those are our people. We pay them to do this. They give us the numbers just like the CBO does. And then our politicians say, well, I'm not a scientist. I can't do that. I don't know what to do with this.
Right. You mentioned the National Academy of Science, which was founded by one of my favorite Republicans, Abraham Lincoln, back in 1863, specifically to advise Congress, the President, and the electorate on technical issues that were above and beyond most of us. So the National Academy selects the best experts in every field, and the Congress or the President can ask them to evaluate an issue. The National Academy had a great record of being pretty much on the money on major scientific issues over 150 years. And they've been completely coherent and completely consistent on climate change since about 1979.
So, those guys, they're just in it for the bucks.
Say, I'm not a scientist or where to get good information on this is just absolutely bogus, because the major experts, the best experts as selected by their peers, have been completely clear on this for decades.
So I think if I was a reporter, I'd turn around and say, if they start talking about what we should be doing in Syria or with ISIS, I would say, excuse me, you're not like a 4-star general, right? So what do you know, really, honestly, about that? Because, you're not qualified to answer this question. But moving on, it's not just, it's scary, Peter, before we get to another topic here. Our number 1-800-MY-CLIMATE on Climate Talk Radio. My guest is Peter Sinclair. And so we'll take some of your calls here. But I do want to say this is not just strictly a Republican thing. It's a changing thing. And I took a look at the New York gubernatorial debate as well. I have a little clip on that. You have 4 candidates there. You have Andrew Cuomo, the Democratic candidate. You have his Republican challenger. You have a Green Party candidate and an independent candidate asked about fracking. So let's listen to that, because this is sort of interesting how each of these different ideological parties, we should say, answered the question.
And this is what the candidates all said about legalizing hydrofracking in New York State.
35 states have natural gas, 34 are safely drilling, and their economies are booming. Let's look at what's going on in Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Dakota. We can do that here in New York.
I say, I'm not a scientist, let the scientists decide. It's very complicated, it's very controversial, people have very different opinions, academic studies come out all different ways. Let the experts decide.
Mr. Cuomo says he's waiting for the science, but when some science came back from the U.S. Geological Survey, his administration wanted to change the results. They edited or were suggesting edits and delays. So what is it?
We have to be sure it's safe. I'm not willing to take a risk to our groundwater and our environment because it might be safe. We have to know if it's going to be safe.
And that was the independent candidate. So 4 different answers to the question about fracking based on which party ticket they were on. Does that surprise you, Peter?
Well, I think it's fortunate that Governor Cuomo chose to take that tack, but I guess, that must be something that's going around.
By the way, I want to interject here. If you're just new to Climate Talk Radio, you don't have to know. We will be talking about issues like fracking. And if you don't know anything about climate change or fracking or all these issues, we are going to continually have what we call truthlets in here. And it's a little bit of 101. We're just not cramming the stuff. It's not some boring science lecture down your throat. But a lot of people just basically don't get this. Peter, I'll just share this with you. That's why I'm relating it. After I ran for Congress and lost my primary election August 5th. I ran on climate change to a pro-fracker. He won. But I took a break at a spa, okay? It took a me day, and wonderful, probably wealthy woman was in there talking to me, very nice. And she asked me what I did for a living. I said, I work on climate change. And she said, what is that? And I thought she was joking. Like, wow. What? Seriously? And she's like looked at me like, oh, it's, all this extreme weather, all that you have, you know what? You just have a really good muscle massage or deep rock, whatever. You have a good day. I am not here to start explaining climate change in the spa. So we will continue with that. But we are talking about fracking, which is slightly different than climate change, which is now super settled, plus, right? But still, he said, I'm not a scientist. That bothers me that Cuomo used those words.
Exactly. Fracking's a whole other conversation, but it does get into what are the best solutions for climate change. And we can talk about how rapidly renewables are moving in and are going to overturn the entire model of energy production that we have in the United States a lot more quickly than most people realize. And this is happening now. But getting back to the original topic, both the New York Times and the Washington Post this week have run articles talking about the prominence of climate and energy in the candidate debates around the country in this midterm election. I think it's remarkable, and I don't think it's going to stop. I think it's going to become only more intense.
Okay, so 1-800-MY-CLIMATE is the number to the program. We will continue with your calls coming up. Actually, I have an award winner for the dumbest weathercaster statement of the week coming up. We have that on tap. We hear a lot of really bad reporting about extreme weather events. We've got a doozy for you. Our number 1-800-MY-CLIMATE. Stay with me, Peter Sinclair, and we'll be taking your calls on Climate Talk Radio.